We begin with sweeping changes to Alberta's youth, gender identity, sports, and surgery policies.
I am confident that Albertans do not want children to make irreversible decisions that impact their reproductive health. I am confident that they do not think that those are child decisions to make, that those are adult decisions to make. I am also confident that parents love their kids and they want to know what's going on with their kids. Doesn't matter what perspective they come from. They want to make sure that they're walking the journey with their child every step of the way. And anyone who's trying to put roadblocks in that child-parent relationship, they've got to, I don't think they have public support.
Among the changes proposed, hormonal treatment, puberty blockers, and gender-affirming surgery will be prohibited for children aged 15 and younger. Students aged 15 or under will now require parental consent to use a new name or pronoun at school. A key change is that parents will have to opt students in to every lesson about sex education, sexual orientation, or gender identity. The law right now requires one notification and the ability for parents to opt out. And transgender women will be banned from competing in women's sports leagues. But the province says it's working to set up gender-neutral divisions.
Danielle Smith and her cabinet are, quite honestly, the last people who should be inserting themselves into people's lives this way. Ironically, Danielle Smith has actually taken away their freedom of choice. At its core, Danielle Smith is playing dangerous politics with the lives of young people.
The message today is, what kind of Canada do we want? Like, what are we creating here? What are we trying to create here? What is she trying to create here? What is the Conservative Party trying to create here? A Canada where there is no diversity? Where if you're different, you don't matter? Is that where we're at? Because that is unacceptable.
Here with federal reaction is Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Official Languages, Randy Boissonnault, who of course is also an Alberta MP for the riding of Edmonton Centre. Minister, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, David.
You heard there from Premier Smith who said these policies are designed to protect LGBTQ plus youth from irreparable harm. What's your response?
Nothing could be further from the truth. I watched that warm, fuzzy video that's full of discrimination and then spent the night consoling people in my province who were crying on the phone, telling me how terrified they were, offering to help me as a federal minister to defend them in Alberta against a premier who's basically decided that the entire LGBTQ community is in her crosshairs. And I can tell you this is worse than anything I would see Jason Kenney do, worse than anything I'd ever see Ralph Klein do. And both of those statements are pretty loaded. Now, let me say this too. In Alberta, the vast majority of parents love their kids, whether they're trans, non-binary, queer, LGBT, but that's not the case for all kids, David. And I can see the stats are on the ground in my city of Edmonton, in Calgary, in smaller centers, where 50% of youth homeless come from the LGBTQ community because some parents kick out their kids when they come out of the closet. And I can tell you that when I told my parents at 28, it was the last conversation I had to have with anyone in my network because it's the hardest conversation. It's the hardest conversation because you don't know if that's it. And you don't know if that's going to be the case. And I can say happily that we got a progressive province, but Danielle Smith does not speak for trans youth, for the LGBTQ community, or the loving parents that want to see those people do well. And this is dangerous for youth in Alberta.
So what is it specifically about the plan she outlined that terrifies people? You know, the age requirements for policies in the health system, or is it the notifications in the education system? Where is the main stress point that as you see it?
So you put your finger on it. And so let's go back to those kids for whom family life is not safe.
Right.
So what they have is a school environment that over time has been made more safe by teachers, by civil society, and the Premier wants to take that away. Why? Because she's going to mandate teachers that if you see a queer kid or you see somebody that wants to, try the different pronoun, you got to call the parents. Now,
so the teachers have to out the kid, essentially.
The teachers have to out the kid, and that is your agency as a person. Is if you're going to come out as non-binary or you want to change your gender over time, or you're a lesbian or you're gay, you got to tell people at your own time and at your own pace. And this is going to make schools not safe for people, and it's also going to mean that we're going to have a bunch of vulnerable kids looking over their shoulders, wondering who's going to out them, to go then tell the teacher, to then call the parents. Like, parents don't call home when the kids break up with a girlfriend or boyfriend. They don't break when they change, there's a class schedule. So why this? And again, it's going to make things less safe for kids. And there's already way too many trans and LGBT kids committing suicide. This is going to end up in more harms to kids.
The federal government has no role in education at the provincial level. This is constitutionally Danielle Smith's jurisdiction, but you do on health. And they have put policies on the table here that would have age requirements and other conditions for things like hormone replacement therapy, hormone therapy, puberty blockers, and then a higher age level for the surgical options that are more permanent options. What is your concern there? Do you have a concern with that? Because a lot of parents may look at that and say, this makes sense to us.
So there's disinformation in the Premier's video. Those top surgeries, for example, can't happen until you're the age of majority. Right. So there's falsehoods in her video. And I think that what's really important here is to realize that kids need to be able to grow and be who they're meant to be. And nobody should have the power to out you. And teachers shouldn't be mandated to do that. And the Premier of the province doesn't have the power to tell somebody what their gender should be or whether they should be straight or LGBTQ2. That is for a person to decide. And we don't need the heavy hand of the state shaping the lives of kids. It's not on.
Right, and I accept your point. The surgeries, you have to be the age of adulthood to be able to do that. Puberty blockers, hormone options, these other drug treatments that they've put the age requirement on. Does the federal government have an issue with that? Because I know you were asked a lot today about whether you would hold back health transfers, depending on, I know you need to see the implementation plan before you can deal with that, but on its face, is that something that you think is a problem? Is that part of the policy that is terrifying people, as you described it?
I'm going to look at the regulation and the legislation very carefully. And let me say this, that when it comes to a medical decision that a young person is taking, that is a decision that should be between them and their medical practitioner. So what is the Premier doing, inserting herself and the state in between a decision that is between a person and their medical provider and their family? That makes no sense to me. And so the other question then, David, is why? Why is she doing this? Why is she picking on a fraction of a population that is already part of a vulnerable population and going after kids? It's a question that deserves to be asked, and there's a campaign across the country with Conservative governments to go down this path to bring Ron DeSantis style anti-gay legislation and agenda here in our country, and it's dangerous. And you've known me since I started in politics, and well before then, I've been in defense of the community and basic rights, and I can tell you that I'm going to defend the community on this one.
Well, Don Braid, the Calgary columnist, and Rick Bell, not exactly left-leaning liberals and progressive, such as yourself, they've posited and written that this is the influence of Take Back Alberta, which is sort of a rural-based, conservative organization that has taken a significant position inside the leadership of the United Conservative Party at the various riding levels, and that is what is pulling the government in this direction, because this is not something that was a core issue in the most recent Alberta election, at least not as part of Danielle Smith's policy. Do you think that's what this is? Is it the influence of Take Back Alberta?
Absolutely. I agree with Don and Rick on this, and I think if you look at Premier Smith's campaign to become leader, not there. Certainly not something that was in the last campaign. And I also think there's another reason. I think this is a useful distraction for her from a disastrous scaling up of the childcare system, a healthcare system that she's got money from us to fix and hasn't done, and the fact that there's inadequate housing across the province. Like, she's got some big fires at home, and what does she do instead? She goes after trans kids, and I bet this is something that she and Tucker Carlson talked about when they were hanging out a couple of weeks ago in my city.
So what do you do about it? I know you're here denouncing it and criticizing it and showing your allyship to the people who are affected by this. But as a practical matter, what can the federal government do here? Because we've seen ministers say, we'll stand up for the kids and support the kids, but outside of moral, political, and vocal support, what can you actually do here because of the jurisdictional issues at play? So
in the short term, three things. Right now, letting the kids at home and across the country know that I'm standing with them, that our government is standing with them, and that we're calling out this supposed legislation that's going to be coming in the fall. Secondly is to be very loud and to mobilize now. And so we've already got the Alberta Teachers Association, the Social Workers of Alberta, the Canadian Civil Liberties, Egal Canada has already indicated there will be a court challenge. There are rallies taking place this weekend, and I'm encouraging people in Alberta to write to their UCP MLA because, David, we're going to kill this bill before it even hits the floor of the ledge. that has to be the plan. And I'm gonna upgrade what you called me. You called me an ally, right? I'm part of the community and I'm a champion for the community, because right now the community needs people to go to bat for them when they're not in the room. And that's what we need, is we need champions who are prepared to act. And that's what I and my colleagues in government are going to do.
More broadly, like, this is the third province to move on policies in some version of this. So this one may be have the most significant impact in terms of breadth and scale of policies. This is such a small segment of the population. I keep coming back to the data that is available on the number of people who are trans or non-binary in Canada, and kids, and men who transition to women who want to play in competitive sports. It is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of Canada. Why do you think this has become such an outsized political issue? Like, what is the benefit to pushing this politically for people?
I think in Danielle Smith's case, she's playing to her base. But it comes at a great cost, a human cost, a cost at the individual level, the young person level. People, like on my phone last night crying. It's going to take a toll on families. I think this is some of the U.S.-style MAGA politics coming across the border. And I think civil society across the country and Canadians have to be very attuned to the fact that, Premier Moe used the notwithstanding clause when he lost. Blaine Higgs put legislation on the table that turned things back against youth. What are other Conservative governments going to do in this country now that Danielle Smith has gone so far? And to bring in sport, to bring in pronouns, to bring in gender-affirming surgery, things that don't really connect, but they do if it's ideological.
But Minister, there's a lot of parents who want this. They like this. They want to be informed. They want to know. They want to have that baked in to the educational system, when they send their kids off, and want to have that level of awareness. I mean, what do you say to parents at home right now who think Danielle Smith is right and that I should know if my kids are going to go through this sort of a change?
I would say that I know that this is a confusing subject to talk about, like gender identity is a hard thing to talk about. And when I was special advisor back in 2016, I had to learn about the trans community.
Right.
And think about that. Like, I'm in the LGBTQ community, and how did I learn from the trans community? By sitting down with people in the community and learning about their struggles and learning about their joys and learning about what they needed us as a government to do with and for them. Danielle Smith has done none of that. She talked to some people in a back room, did a fancy video that makes some people feel warm and fuzzy and terrifies others. And that's not going to help the kids. And we have to protect the kids in our jurisdiction. And I just have to say that, when it comes to parents feeling weird about this conversation, that's it. But the parents who love their kids and have good relationship with their kids, guess what? Their kids are going to tell them that they want to try a new pronoun. Their kids are going to tell them that they feel like they're in the wrong gender. And so what I'm very concerned about is sticking up for those kids that, when this all goes wrong, end up on the street, end up being prostituted, end up dying because they simply don't have the supports. And it's on all leaders to make sure that we keep kids alive, and that includes people in this community.
Edmonton Centre MP and Federal Cabinet Minister Randy Boissonnault, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, David.
Okay, how could all of this play out politically and across the country? Let's bring in the power panel on that. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. James Moore is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister. And here with me in studio, Carleen Verheyen is a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers. Andrew, let's start with you. You heard Danielle Smith. She says this is about protecting LGBTQ youth and their parents' rights. Her critics say this is discriminatory policy that will put kids at risk. What's your take on what we saw play out today?
Well, we've talked about this before with Saskatchewan. We've talked about it with New Brunswick. What's interesting about this legislation is it's kind of the grab bag of right-wing boogeyman issues all being knit together here. She's got the gender reassignment stuff. She's going all in against the sex ed. She's got a whole bunch of issues kind of tied in to this. That's obviously speaking to to her base, and I think it seems politically. I mean, others have talked about the merits of the legislation. I thought Randy Boissonnault's comments earlier in the show were, really right on in terms of what he was identifying as the problems. But politically, she's obviously trying to deflect. She's got a problem with the right wing of her base. She's trying to show that she's still got those kind of mega street cred things that she's working on, and she's got a set of issues that my guess is parents will look at a number of those different pieces and voters and they'll go, well, I agree with this, I don't agree with that, but it's all lumped together, what do you do? The big problem here is really on what she's driving towards, which is she's starting to move more and more into the question of what should be decided by doctors and what should be, decided by government. And that is a very dangerous step to start to move into. She's taken this very odd position on sex ed. I mean, sex ed today is a lot different than what I took in the 1970s. I mean, there's a lot more discussion about consent. There's a lot more discussion about online activity. There's obviously much more focus on sexual health and safety. Those pieces are now all essentially put at risk within their system. That's not a great approach. But she's tying this up into a choice issue, and I think it's a dangerous deflection.
James, Rachel Notley said this is interfering in a private decision between a youth and their doctor, and Smith is weaponizing their life experience for political reasons. What do you make of this state intervention into what Andrew and others say should be maybe a private medical decision?
I think Premier Notley's oversimplifying it, but to be fair, I think Rachel Notley's oversimplifying it, but to be fair, I think Premier Smith is also oversimplifying it. To Andrew's point, and I agree with him, there's actually a lot that's contained in what was announced. And some of it, I mean, depending on your perspective, some of it makes sense, some of it makes common sense, some of it makes no sense, some of it's already happened. For example, the some gender reassignment surgery is not permitted for people who are not 18 years and above. The sex ed stuff seems odd that you would actually have to have thousands of teachers across the province of Alberta go to parents and get parents' consent to opt in. And you can imagine the confrontations and discussions. And like, teachers are not paid enough for that kind of a conversation and that dynamic. But on the other hand, I think for a lot of everyday Albertans, and I imagine Shachi will either has the numbers or will put them in the field soon with Angus Reid. But I think for a lot of Albertans, I think there's kind of a common sense element here. And a lot of Albertans are not going to take kindly to whether it's Rachel Notley or Minister Boissonnault preaching at them, saying that they're endangering and they're going to kill kids. When you have to have parental consent to buy a lottery ticket, to get a driver's license. You can't vote until you're 18. You can't drink or buy a pack of cigarettes, but you can make a life-altering permanent decision to your physical makeup without the consent of your parents. I think for a lot of everyday Albertans, there's an incongruity there and an inconsistency that they're really not comfortable with, and they would like to understand better why it is that demanding consistency makes them somehow hateful or putting children at risk in a way that is against their values, and yelling at them and saying that they're anti-Canadian and they don't care about kids is probably not the best way to build community and to have a proper conversation as adults.
Carleen, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, the federal Liberals were really strong in attacking Danielle Smith on this. We've heard silence from the federal Conservatives. We're told no comment from Pierre Poilievre's office. What's your thoughts on where this is today?
If people ever needed proof that a Conservative government would not hesitate, given a majority and given the power to do so, to interfere with people's choices in what medical procedures they undergo, there's your proof right there. So if you are a parent, if you are a woman who cares about her ability to make reproductive choices, today's a day that you're very, very concerned. There's absolutely no line between choices like that. This is big government intrusion at its worst, and perhaps most ironically, it's big government intrusion from somebody who was elected on a wave of support for fighting back against government vaccine mandates. So that's the first thing that I think needs saying right off the bat. In terms of what's common sense and what's not, comparisons to other things that kids require parental consent for do not apply here. No kid has ever been kicked out of the house because they asked their parents for consent to buy a pack of cigarettes or get in the car and drive. We are talking about a small minority of kids and young people who perhaps don't have the kind of safe environment at home in which they can feel free and open and safe to be open with their parents about who they are. I haven't seen any proof, any evidence in the court cases that have been filed in either of the other two provinces where similar measures have been put forward to suggest that there's a problem that needs fixing here. And that's how you know that it really is just about politics, that this is about appealing to that sort of more radical base, like Andrew mentioned, that needs some appeasing right now, and it's doing it at the expense of kids' lives.
Okay, James, I'll come back to you in just one second. I want to get Shachi's first take, because I know you have some rebuttal there, I promise. But Shachi, just what are your thoughts on this?
Well, without getting into the adjectives of what that right of center wild roast base is, the fact of the matter is that what we see among Albertans and among Albertan parents is not necessarily that they want consent. What they want is information. They want to be told, right? It's like, at least tell us, keep us in the loop. We don't want to create a situation where there's things going on at school that we don't know about. When you get into the issue of consent, that parents have to sign off, support for that drops way down. Information only, 78% of Albertans say, yeah, that's appropriate. Information and consent, that drops to 43%, not the majority. However, 43% is a pretty significant plurality view. There's no judgment from me in whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It is what it is. And the last time we checked Danielle Smith's approval numbers at the end of the year, back in December, she was at 47% approval, far higher than Blaine Higgs, far higher than Doug Ford. He would dream about those numbers at night. So the political aspect of this is a winning aspect for Danielle Smith. Well, where the politics and the policy intersect, where that starts to really blow up, it's a far different story. And we have to now see, looking forward, how Albertans react to these legislative changes. Do they think it's a step too far? But when it comes to her base, when it comes to the right of center base, they're all in on this. And it's why she's not seen significant blowback so far in talking about these issues. And I doubt we're going to see significant blowback. But, you know, I don't want to prejudge what the numbers will be come March.
Okay, James, you wanted to get in there. Yeah,
Shachi's right. I think this is probably the beginning of a debate, and you know, I said the word garbage a second ago because I think the debate matters. And if I'm a parent of a child whose sexual identity is now being chastised, mocked, yelled at, and you see some of the stuff that's being said online right now, I'd be pretty angry at my Premier Danielle Smith for starting this debate when you would probably have to knock on about 100,000 doors in the province of Alberta to find the first Albertan who would think that this is the number one issue. But the comment that was made a minute ago that, you know, if you ever want to know what a Conservative government would look like in taking away choice and going after, please. I was in politics for 15 years. I was a cabinet minister for 10 in a majority Conservative government. The majority Conservative governments of Doug Ford, of Brian Pallister, of Heather Stephenson, of Brad Wall, of Gordon Campbell, of Danny Williams, of Jean Charest, I can go on and on. They didn't do this. There's nuance and there's difference about this. And this sweeping generalization of this is what Conservatives do, it's the kind of grade 8 language about politics that gets us nowhere when we want to have rational conversations about how to best protect kids. And everybody wants to protect kids here. Now, you can argue that Danielle Smith is being political about this and taking advantage of things and trying to, that's a perfectly reasonable argument that Andrew put in the window there. But this blanched sweeping statements and chastising half the population because you don't happen to have their position on things is just wrong, and it's ignorant, and it's garbage.
Okay. I think I'd have an easier time believing that if we had any sort of comment today from the federal Conservative Party, who instead have been absolutely silent.
Right. So Andrew,
I'm one of the founding members of the Conservative Party and a cabinet minister in that party, and there's nuance and differences of opinion. So with respect, there's diversity in the Conservative movement, just as there is in other political parties, and cut it out.
Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Thanks for coming to me on this. Now, between the two, I mean, I think, you know, they're laying out really, I think, both pretty interesting arguments. On this. I mean, there are a lot of issues that we need to discuss as, you know, our society's evolving, and we've got to figure out how to do that in a respectful way. But there is a degree of political gamesmanship here, and I think we recognize that. I think everybody kind of understands politicians act in political ways, surprise, surprise. The question is, what is the potential collateral damage here, and are these the kind of issues, is this the kind of way to have that debate? It is interesting that she's gone several steps further on this than the other premiers dared. It's interesting that some premiers like Doug Ford, who's a dyed-in-the-wool Conservative, obviously, this isn't anywhere on his agenda. I mean, you don't hear this come up at all in terms of their education approach. They're talking about why we need to have discussion about the Holocaust in the high schools, not this kind of conversation that's being pitched by other premiers. So, James's point, obviously the Conservatives have differences of view, but there is a very strong strain here that does seem to want to bring that American culture war up into Canada. And frankly, I think there's a number of of Liberals that are kind of chomping at the bit for that too, because it gets off of the distractions around what's going on with the economy.
So James, just on that diversity of views inside the Conservative movement, and I take your point, right? There are a lot of very socially progressive Conservatives, you know, and the ones I covered in Atlantic Canada, for instance. But, you know, we have seen Melissa Lantsman, after Andrew Scheer lost the 2019 election, write an article with Jamie Ellerton in the Globe and Mail saying the party needs to change because we don't have a good answer on gay marriage and gay rights. Eric Duncan, Michelle Rempel, they have all spoken out in favor of this in the past. They've been silent on this one. Why do you think that is? Why are we not hearing? I accept the sincerity of their views on this, but their silence is being noted as they're not weighing in on these policies.
Well, I mean, look, they can speak for themselves. They have spoken up in the past on some of these other policies, number one. But two, look, there were 100 Conservative MPs in 2005 in the House of Commons. There were 3 who voted in favor of same-sex marriage. I was one of them. So, you know, and the Conservative movement does have a broad diversity of views. But you mentioned as well, you know, Tucker Carlson comes up to Alberta last week and gives a speech. And there are some people who do want to have culture wars. You know who the happiest person was to see Tucker Carlson in Canada last week? Justin Trudeau, so we can have this debate, so we can dial up the temperature, so we can create this culture. And there are people, of course, who want to have the culture wars on the other side. And I think all this stuff, broadly speaking, is entertainment at the expense of vulnerable kids. And I think that's wrong. And I think that's bad. And I think that is toxic. And I don't like people who play with this on either side, which is why the broad sweeping statement that was made earlier got my back up, because I do think there's nuance here. There are some parts of Danielle Smith's policy that she announced that frankly don't make any sense. There are others that I think for a lot of Albertans and a lot of people make some kind of common sense. Some of them are kind of weird. But that said, let's have a conversation about it and let's have a discussion about it. And let's not sink down to culture war politics and just get angry at each other, because it gets us nowhere. And the only people who lose are the most vulnerable. And that's an ultimate failing.
Well, Shachi, just give you the last word on this. A conversation's good, but like when the leading political party nationally isn't saying anything, I don't know how you have that conversation with the people who would potentially form that next cabinet at the national level.
Well, 2 things really quickly. First of all, if anybody wants to know where Canadians stand on the culture wars and where they situate themselves on that spectrum and within that debate, go to angusreid.org. We did a 5-part series on it, and including gender issues, and that's where I'm drawing some of these data from. But in terms of what the Conservatives are doing, and I don't speak for the Conservative Party, I wouldn't purport to, no matter what the toxic bots on Twitter say, they can go hang for all I care. There is the fact that Pierre Poilievre would be politically stupid to take the bait. Why wade into it? He knows he's already drawing, the party is drawing more and more 2021 Liberal voters who are starting to come over to the Conservative Party, not over gender issues, not over culture war issues, over economic issues. The ones who are feeling it the worst, those who voted Liberal in 21, who are starting to drift away from the party, are looking for economic solutions. There is absolutely no upside in wading into this politically. You say something even mildly supportive of the stance that Danielle Smith, a premier who, you know, by the way, Constitution's 101, provinces are responsible for educational policy, whether it's good policy or bad policy. He weighs into that. He draws the ire of the people who say stay in your lane, or people who actually agree with Danielle Smith. He says something, you know, in the other direction, supportive or otherwise. He risks losing a lot of those soft Liberal voters who are starting to give him a kick of the tire, a whiff of the sniff test, and say, well, maybe this guy could be our next PM. So there's zero upside for wading into this, which is, I believe, why you've heard nothing out of them today.
So, Carleen, just a quick final point. I mean, people praise the Conservatives for their message discipline and laser focusing on axe to tax, you know, fix the budget, stop the crime, build the homes. In government, you can't just deal with the 4 core issues. So how tenable do you think it is for them to not weigh in on this or offer some clarity on how they feel about this going forward?
I think it's going to depend on exactly what the mechanics of Premier Smith's policies actually look like. And as she noted today, those are going to roll out over the coming months. If there are ways in which the federal government is able to mount any kind of opposition from their seat to any of this, whether it's through the Canada Health Act or elsewhere, that will present a de facto sort of opportunity and necessity for the opposition party to have a position on that federal position. If not, I think it's going to depend a lot on Canadians. And just maybe to finish off, I think the reason that you're seeing progressive-minded people take this issue so seriously is because it is such a serious one, and that's as simple as it is.